At my daughter's 30th birthday, her mother-in-law gave her a framed cleaning schedule. My son-in-law laughed and said, "Open it, Emma, you're going to love it." My daughter burst into tears. I stood up and said, "Now open my gift." When they saw what was in the envelope, his smile disappeared. My son-in-law's mother handed her a wrapped box and said, "A gift for the woman who finally learned her place." My son-in-law laughed and added, "Open it, Emma, you're going to love it." My daughter unwrapped it slowly, her hands trembling. Inside was a laminated cleaning schedule with her name printed at the top, detailing every chore she was expected to complete daily. The entire table erupted in laughter. My daughter sat frozen, tears pooling in her eyes. But I didn't freeze. I stood up, reached into my jacket pocket, and pulled out an envelope. "Now open my gift," I said. When my son-in-law saw what was inside, his smile disappeared completely. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? What time is it there? If this video is reaching you, it means you need to hear it. Just like my brother's phone call saved my daughter's life, your comment might save someone else's. 4 months before Emma's birthday, my phone rang at 6 in the morning. It was my younger brother Vincent calling from Portland. We talked maybe twice a year, usually on holidays. So when I saw his name on my screen that early, I knew something was wrong. "Gerald," he said, his voice rough like he hadn't slept. "I need to tell you something about Emma. Something I should have told you months ago." I sat up in bed, my heart already racing. "What about Emma?" Vincent paused. "I saw her last week. She came to Portland for a conference and we grabbed coffee. Gerald, she's not okay. She's not the same person anymore." I wanted to argue. I wanted to say he was wrong. That Emma was fine. That she had a beautiful house in Connecticut, a successful husband, everything she'd ever wanted. But something in his voice stopped me. "Tell me everything," I said. Vincent told me about their conversation. How Emma had flinched when her phone buzzed. How she'd checked her watch every 10 minutes, anxious about getting back to the hotel before her husband called. How she'd ordered water because she didn't have access to her own bank account anymore. "She asked me not to tell you," Vincent said quietly. "She made me promise. But I can't keep this secret, Gerald. I watched our mother live like this. I'm not going to watch your daughter do the same. Our mother, I hadn't thought about her in years. Not like this. She'd spent 32 years married to a man who controlled every dollar, every friendship, every decision. When she finally left at 58, she had nothing. No savings, no credit history, no home of her own. She died in a rented room 3 years later, still rebuilding a life that should have been hers all along." "Gerald," Vincent continued, his voice breaking slightly. "Emma needs something in her name, something her husband can't touch. She needs to know she has a way out before she forgets she deserves one." I hung up the phone and sat in silence for a long time. My daughter, my brilliant, independent, fearless daughter, the girl who'd graduated top of her class at Columbia, the woman who'd built a marketing career from nothing. She was disappearing, and I hadn't even noticed. That morning I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to give my daughter what my mother never had, an escape route. Even if it cost me everything I owned. I was 67 years old with a professor's pension, a paid-off condo in Boston, and a savings account I'd been building for 30 years. I'd planned to leave it all to Emma eventually, but eventually wasn't good enough anymore. She needed it now. The first thing I sold was the condo. 40 years of memories packed into cardboard boxes and loaded into a storage unit. The real estate agent thought I was crazy, selling a 2-bedroom in Back Bay for quick cash. I didn't explain. I just signed the papers and deposited the check. Then came Margaret's things. My late wife had passed 8 years ago, but I'd kept her jewelry, her paintings, the vintage furniture she'd collected over decades. I sold them piece by piece at estate shops across the city. Every transaction felt like a small betrayal, but I reminded myself why I was doing it. I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Somerville. My knees ACHD climbing the 3 flights of stairs, but the rent was cheap, and I needed every dollar for what came next. I found the apartment in Manhattan through a lawyer friend. It was small, a 1-bedroom in Washington Heights. Nothing fancy, but it was clean, safe, and most importantly, it was something I could buy outright with cash. No mortgage, no debt, no paper trail that could be traced back to Emma's husband. I met with a lawyer named Patricia Okonkwo, recommended by a colleague from my teaching days. She specialized in domestic situations, cases where assets needed protection from controlling spouses. "You want this entirely in your daughter's name?" Patricia asked, reviewing my paperwork. Sole ownership, no exceptions. That's right, I said. Her husband can't know it exists. If they divorce, if she needs to leave, this apartment belongs only to her. Patricia nodded slowly. This is smart, Mr. Hartwell. More fathers should think this way. But you understand what you're giving up. This is your retirement fund. I looked at her directly. My retirement doesn't matter if my daughter is trapped in a marriage that's destroying her. My mother never had anyone to protect her. I'm not making that mistake with Emma. Patricia drew up the papers that week. The apartment was purchased under Emma's maiden name, held in a trust she didn't even know existed. The deed was locked in Patricia's office, waiting for the day my daughter would need it. But I wasn't done. I took the remaining money and opened a separate account, also in Emma's name, depositing enough for her to start over completely. New apartment, new life, new beginning. All she had to do was say the word. 3 months of preparation. 3 months of living on Social Security and instant noodles. 3 months of hope that I was wrong about everything. That Emma was fine. That I was just an overprotective father seeing shadows where there were none. I wasn't wrong. Emma's 30th birthday dinner was held at the Whitmore estate in Greenwich. Richard Whitmore, my son-in-law's father, had built a real estate empire worth hundreds of millions. The family home was a 12-bedroom mansion with a staff of 7. I'd been there twice before, for the wedding and for Christmas 2 years ago. Both times I'd felt like a visitor in a museum. I drove down from Boston that morning, the envelope tucked safely in my jacket pocket. I'd rehearsed what I would say a dozen times, but I still didn't know how the evening would unfold. I only knew that my daughter needed to understand she had options. The dinner was catered, of course. 30 guests seated around a table long enough to land a small plane. Crystal glasses, white tablecloths, servers in black uniforms moving silently between courses, everything designed to impress. Emma sat at the center next to her husband Daniel. She was wearing a dress I didn't recognize, something conservative and beige that seemed to swallow her whole. Her hair was pulled back tightly. She smiled when appropriate, laughed when expected, but her eyes were somewhere else entirely. I watched her throughout the appetizer course. She barely touched her food. Every few minutes she glanced at Daniel, checking his expression, reading his mood. When he frowned at something she said, she immediately apologized. When he put his hand on her arm, she tensed. My daughter was afraid of her own husband. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Then came the gifts. Daniel's mother, Victoria, stood up first. She was a thin woman, with sharp features and sharper words. The kind of person who smiled while delivering insults. I have something special for our Emma, Victoria announced, her voice carrying across the room. Something I've been working on for months. She handed Emma a wrapped box, watching expectantly as my daughter opened it. Inside was a laminated sheet of paper professionally printed and framed. It's a household management schedule, Victoria explained, her smile widening. I've outlined all the daily tasks, the weekly responsibilities, everything a proper wife should handle. Since you've struggled to keep up with the Whitmore standards, I thought some guidance might help. The table went silent for a moment. Then Daniel laughed. That's perfect, Mother. Emma needs the structure. She's been so disorganized lately. Several guests chuckled nervously. Emma's face had gone completely pale. She stared at the framed schedule, her hands shaking slightly. I looked around the table, waiting for someone to speak up. No one did. Not Daniel's father, Richard, who studied his wine glass. Not Emma's friends, who avoided eye contact. Not even Emma herself, who simply nodded and whispered, "Thank you, Victoria, I appreciate the thought." That was when I stood up. I didn't rush. I didn't raise my voice. I simply stood slowly and deliberately, and every eye in that dining room turned to me. I walked around the table to where Emma sat. I took the frame schedule from her hands and set it face down on the table. My daughter deserves a real gift, I said, my voice steady. I pulled the envelope from my jacket pocket and handed it to her. Emma looked at me confused and frightened. "Dad, what is this?" "Open it," I said quietly. "Read it out loud." Her hands trembled as she tore open the envelope. Inside was the apartment deed and the bank statement. Her eyes moved across the documents, not understanding at first, then slowly comprehending. "Property deed," she read, her voice barely above a whisper. "Owner, Emma Grace Hartwell. Address, 847 West 181st Street, Apartment 4B, New York, New York." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, I don't understand." It's yours, I said. Completely yours. Your name only. No one can take it from you. The room had gone absolutely silent. 30 people, holding their breath. Daniel's face transformed from confusion to anger, to something darker. His jaw tightened, his hands gripped the edge of the table. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, standing up. "You bought my wife an apartment? Why would she need her own apartment?" Before I could answer, something unexpected happened. Richard Whitmore, Daniel's father, slowly rose from his seat at the head of the table. He was 74 years old, a man who'd built an empire through silence and careful calculation. I'd never heard him say more than a few words at family gatherings. "Sit down, Daniel," Richard said, his voice carrying an authority that silenced the room completely. Daniel froze. "Father." Richard walked over to where Emma sat, still holding the deed. He looked at her for a long moment, then turned to face his son. "Your grandfather treated your grandmother the way you treat Emma," Richard said slowly. "I watched it for 40 years. I told myself it was none of my business, that marriage was private, that he loved her in his own way." He paused, his voice thickening. "Your grandmother spent the last decade of her life in a nursing home alone because she had nothing of her own. No home, no savings, no independence. She died asking for permission to watch television." Richard turned back to Emma. "You're fortunate to have a father who loves you enough to protect you." He glanced at me and I saw something like respect in his eyes. "And I'm sorry my son isn't the man you deserve." Victoria's face had gone from shock to fury. "Richard, how dare you? This is our family, our reputation." Richard didn't even look at her. He simply sat back down and turned his attention to his plate, dismissing his wife's outrage completely. The dinner ended shortly after that. Guests made excuses and left quickly, uncomfortable with the tension that hung in the air. Emma sat frozen, clutching the deed like a lifeline. Daniel stormed out without a word, his mother following close behind. I stayed with Emma until the room was empty. Then I took her hands in mine and said the words I'd been preparing for months. "You have choices, Emma. You have an escape route. You matter. And whenever you're ready to use them, I'll be right here." She collapsed into my arms and sobbed. "Really?" Sobbed for the first time in what I suspected was years. After that night, things moved quickly in the wrong direction. Daniel didn't let Emma out of his sight for weeks. He confiscated her phone, claiming he needed to check something and never returning it. He moved her car keys to his office. He canceled her credit cards, explaining to the bank that they'd been compromised. Emma called me once from a payphone near a grocery store. Her voice was hushed and hurried. "Dad, I only have a minute. Daniel is picking me up soon." "Emma, are you okay? Are you safe?" "I'm fine," she said, but her voice cracked. "I just wanted you to know that I remember I have choices. I remember I have somewhere to go. Use them," I urged. "Come to Boston. Come to your apartment. I'll help you start over." "Not yet," she whispered. "He's watching everything. If I leave now before I'm ready, he'll find me. I need to be smart about this." She hung up before I could respond. 3 weeks later I got a call from Emma's best friend, Natalie. We'd met once at the wedding, and I barely remembered her face. But I remembered her voice, urgent and scared. "Mr. Hartwell, something happened. Emma asked me to call you. She said you'd know what to do." My heart stopped. "What happened?" "They were at a restaurant," Natalie explained quickly. "Daniel accused Emma of flirting with the waiter. He grabbed her arm so hard it left bruises. When she tried to leave, he blocked the door. The manager called the police. But Daniel convinced them it was a misunderstanding." "Where is Emma now?" "At home." Daniel took her home. She managed to text me from his phone when he was in the shower. "She said to tell you she's ready. She's ready to leave." I was in my car within 10 minutes driving toward Connecticut, with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. I called Patricia Okonkwo on the way. She answered on the second ring. "Emma's ready to leave," I said without preamble. "What do we need to do?" Patricia's voice was calm and focused. "Does she have access to her documents? Passport, social security card, birth certificate? I don't know. Probably not." "Okay, here's what we're going to do." Patricia walked me through the plan step by step. "Get Emma out of the house safely. Bring her directly to the apartment in New York. Do not stop anywhere Daniel might expect. Once she's secure, we file for divorce and request a protective order." I called Emma from a gas station 20 meters from Greenwich. She answered on the first ring, her voice barely audible. "Dad, I'm coming. Be ready to leave in 2 hours. Pack only what you can carry. Meet me at the corner of Maple and 3rd at exactly 8. Silence, then almost a whisper. "He's watching me, Dad. He checks the security cameras constantly. If I try to leave, he'll know." I close my eyes and force my voice to stay steady. "Can you get to the grocery store? Tell him you need something for dinner, maybe." "I think so. Do it." "Go to the grocery store at 7:45. I'll be waiting in the parking lot. Silver Honda Civic. Leave everything behind. The only thing you need is yourself. Another long pause. What if he finds me? He won't, I said, even though I wasn't entirely sure. That's why we planned ahead. That's why you have an apartment he doesn't know exists. That's why you have choices, Emma. And tonight you're going to use them. At 7:52, Emma walked out of the grocery store empty-handed. She was wearing jeans and a dark jacket, her hair pulled back, her face pale but determined. She saw my car and walked toward it quickly, not running but moving with purpose. She opened the passenger door and slid inside. Go, she said. Please, just go. I drove. We didn't speak for the first 30 minutes, both of us watching the mirrors, waiting for headlights to appear behind us. None did. When we crossed the border into New York, Emma finally exhaled. I can't believe I did it, she whispered. I actually left. You left, I confirmed. And you're never going back. She looked down at her hands, still trembling slightly. He's going to be so angry. When he realizes I'm gone, he's going to lose his mind. That's why we're going somewhere. He can't find you. I kept my eyes on the road. Patricia is meeting us at the apartment. She has paperwork ready. Tomorrow we file for divorce and request a restraining order. Emma nodded slowly. The apartment? The one from the birthday dinner. It's been yours this whole time, I said, waiting for you. She was quiet for a long moment, then softly, Mom would be proud of you, Dad. You know that, right? I blinked back tears. I think she'd be proud of both of us. We arrived at the apartment building just after 11. Patricia was waiting in the lobby, a folder of documents under her arm. She hugged Emma, like a sister, then led us upstairs to apartment 4B. It was small, just like I remembered. A living room, a bedroom, a tiny kitchen, a bathroom with a window that looked out on a fire escape. Nothing fancy, but it was clean, safe, and filled with everything Emma would need to start over. I'd spent the last month furnishing it quietly, piece by piece. Emma walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, the curtains, the kitchen counter. When she reached the bedroom, she stopped. There was a photograph on the nightstand. Emma and Margaret, taken 15 years ago at Emma's high school graduation. My wife's arm around our daughter, both of them beaming at the camera. Emma picked up the frame, her shoulders shaking. Oh, Dad. I stood in the doorway, watching my daughter reclaim herself one breath at a time. She's with you, I said quietly. She always has been, and she'd want you to know that you deserve this. You deserve all of it. The next 6 months were a blur of courtrooms, paperwork, and small victories. Daniel fought the divorce with everything he had. He hired 3 different lawyers, filed motion after motion, demanded access to assets Emma had never touched. He even tried to claim the apartment was marital property, despite having no evidence it existed before the separation. Patricia shut down every attempt. The apartment was purchased before the marriage showed any signs of trouble, she explained to the judge. It was a gift from a father to his daughter, held in trust entirely in her maiden name. Mr. Whitmore has no claim. Daniel's face during that hearing was something I'll never forget. The realization that he'd lost control. The understanding that his wife, the woman he'd spent years diminishing, had a father who'd planned for exactly this moment. The divorce was finalized in April. Emma received nothing from the Witters. No settlement, no alimony, nothing. She didn't want it. What she wanted was freedom, and freedom was exactly what she got. A permanent restraining order was issued. Daniel was prohibited from contacting Emma in any way, from approaching her apartment, from interfering with her life. If he violated the order, he would face immediate arrest. The last time I saw Daniel was outside the courthouse after the final hearing. He stood with his mother, both of them looking smaller somehow, diminished by the loss of control they'd taken for granted. He caught my eye across the parking lot. For a moment, I thought he might say something. Instead, he just shook his head and walked away. I never saw him again. Emma started rebuilding her life one day at a time. She reconnected with friends she'd lost, starting with Natalie, who'd helped save her that night in Connecticut. She found a job at a small marketing firm in Brooklyn. Nothing glamorous, but steady work that paid her bills and reminded her she had skills worth valuing. 6 months after the divorce, she called me with news. Dad, I got promoted. They made me creative director. I laughed out loud. The first real laugh I'd had in over a year. That's my girl. I knew you had it in you. She paused. It's not just that. I'm happy, Dad. Actually happy. I wake up in the morning, and I'm not afraid. I go to sleep at night and no one's monitoring my phone. I make decisions about my own life and no one tells me I'm wrong. That's what freedom feels like, I said quietly. That's what you always deserved. Another pause. I met someone. His name is Marcus. He's a teacher at the elementary school down the street. Is he good to you? Dad, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. He asks my opinion. He listens to my answers. He's never once told me what to do. I didn't know relationships could feel like this. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. That's how it's supposed to be, Emma. That's love. I met Marcus 3 weeks later when I came down to New York for a visit. He was younger than I'd expected. Maybe 35, with kind eyes and an easy laugh. He shook my hand firmly and looked me in the eye. Mr. Hartwell, he said, Emma talks about you constantly, what you did for her, how you protected her, the apartment, all of it. I just want you to know how much I respect what you sacrificed. I studied him for a long moment. You understand what she's been through? Marcus nodded seriously. I do. And I understand my job isn't to fix her or save her. It's just to love her and let her be herself. That's all she needs. I looked at Emma, standing beside him, relaxed and smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. She'd found someone who understood that loving a person meant giving them space to grow. Take care of her, I said to Marcus. But I suspect she doesn't need much taken care of anymore. He grinned. No, sir. She definitely does not. One afternoon, about a year after the divorce, I visited Emma at her apartment. It was spring, and she'd planted flowers in pots on the fire escape. The place felt alive now, filled with color and warmth, and the evidence of a life well lived. Emma made tea, and we sat together on her small couch, watching the afternoon light filter through the windows. Dad, she said eventually, I need to tell you something. I waited. When you gave me that envelope at the birthday dinner, I didn't understand what you were really giving me. She set down her cup and turned to face me. I thought it was just an apartment, a backup plan. But it wasn't, was it? I shook my head. No, you were telling me I mattered, she continued. You were telling me that someone saw what was happening even when I couldn't see it myself. You were telling me that I had choices, that I deserved freedom, that there was a way out if I ever needed it. She paused, her eyes filling with tears. You gave me permission to save myself. I reached over and took her hand. That's all I ever wanted, Emma, for you to know you were worth saving. She squeezed my hand tightly. Mom would be so proud of you. I smiled through my own tears. She'd be proud of both of us. Last month Emma called me with news that made everything worthwhile. Dad, she said, her voice trembling with excitement. Marcus proposed. We're getting married. I sat down slowly, my heart full in a way I hadn't felt in years. Emma, that's wonderful. And there's something else, she continued. We're having a baby. I'm 3 months along. You're going to be a grandfather. I couldn't speak for a long moment. When I finally found my voice, it cracked. A grandfather, I whispered. Emma, I don't know what to say. Say you'll be there, she said softly. Say you'll teach my daughter what you taught me. That she has choices. That she deserves freedom. That no one has the right to control her life. I thought about my mother who never had anyone to protect her. I thought about Emma, who'd almost lost herself in a marriage designed to diminish her. I thought about the baby growing inside my daughter. A little girl who would never know what it felt like to ask permission to exist. I'll be there, I promised, every step of the way. The wedding was held in the courtyard of a small restaurant in Brooklyn. Nothing fancy, no 12-bedroom mansions or catered dinners for 30, just 40 people who loved Emma and Marcus, gathered to celebrate something real. When I walked my daughter down the aisle, I felt the weight of everything we'd survived together. The birthday dinner, the escape, the courtroom battles, the slow, steady work of rebuilding a life. Emma looked beautiful, not in the beige conservative way she'd looked at the Whitmore estate, but in a way that was entirely her own. She wore a simple white dress and flowers in her hair. She was radiant. As I handed her to Marcus, I leaned close and whispered, You deserve all of this, Emma, every moment of it. She kissed my cheek. I know, Dad. Because of you, I finally know. I sat down in the front row and watched my daughter marry a man who loved her for exactly who she was. And when they exchanged vows, promising to support each other's dreams and respect each other's independence, I understood that the cycle had finally broken. 3 generations. My mother, who never had anyone to protect her, my daughter, who'd found her way back to freedom, and my granddaughter who would grow up knowing from her first breath that she had choices, that she mattered, that no one could ever take her freedom away. That was my legacy. Not the money I'd spent or the apartment I'd bought, but the message those things carried. You have choices. You have an escape route. You matter. My name is Gerald Hartwell, and this is my true story. For years, I watched my daughter disappear into a marriage that looked perfect from the outside. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. I told myself she'd figure it out. I was wrong. So don't be like me. Don't wait. If someone you love is being controlled, manipulated, isolated, speak up. Your willingness to listen might be the escape route someone desperately needs. This true story taught me one profound lesson. Freedom isn't free. It costs sacrifice. It costs time. It costs everything you're willing to give for someone you love. But we weren't created to live in cages. We were created to choose, to flourish, to be free. When my granddaughter is born later this year, she'll grow up knowing she has choices. That true story of Emma's escape became my mission to share with the world. These grandpa stories aren't just entertainment. They're warnings. They're hope. They're proof that it's never too late to fight back. If you recognize yourself in this true story, if you're trapped, controlled, or afraid, please reach out. You deserve freedom. You deserve choices. You deserve to laugh without fear. Comment below. Share this story. Subscribe to our channel for more real, raw stories that matter. Because every grandpa story has the power to save someone. Every true story deserves to be heard.